Hello, everyone. It's Jason Grant from Integral, and tonight I have Shrutin Shetty, who is the author of the book Design the Future from India. And without further ado, Shrutin, please introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do.
Uh, Hi, Jason. Thanks for having me here. Uh, well, I'm a design strategist, a design strategy consultant. I kind of work with young businesses, small and medium businesses, and startups in India and abroad. I'm supported by an external team of consultants, which seems to work perfectly well. Since a lot of these young businesses probably couldn't afford, a full-fledged team of us consultants. So depending on the kind of requirement, I bring in one or more of these consultants on board on a project. I've worked across sectors with businesses, helping them kind of understand their customers better, customer needs better, and then innovate and grow. And yeah, just wrote this book on design thinking towards helping, let's say, design thinking enthusiasts as well as people who have already been practicing design thinking, in the hope of sharing with them my observations and tips and tricks about design thinking. That's about it.
Cool stuff. So tell us about the core premise of the book. What is the actual, core of it?
Right. Well, so the way I have designed the book in terms of topics, it runs from the very basics of trying to define design thinking. So while researching that, I kind of found out that just two people from IDEO, which is probably the most popular and famous design consulting firm in the world. Uh, the founder and the current CEO, between them, they already had like three definitions of design thinking over time. And you can imagine, so different people tend to have their own definition of it. So essentially, the book runs through trying to define design thinking, and the way it has been structured is that somebody who just wants to get just an overview of what design thinking is can probably just read a chapter or two and would get a fair sense of it. Those who might be interested in practicing it could probably read a few more chapters which run through uh, the steps where I have uh, essentially used the Stanford, the 5 steps that the D school uses, and I've added about 4 steps to it. So, the process that I use has 9 steps in it. And then it runs through a lot of examples, things that I've read or come across or worked on myself, to give readers a good sense of where design thinking can be used and how it can be used, and also certain cases where maybe design thinking was not used and maybe lives were lost, because of not thinking so much from a customer's point of view. And then it moves on in increasing levels of complexity towards it compares with, or I compare it with, the quality revolution from the 80s and 90s. And finally, my most interesting topic, where I use design thinking and human behavior and psychology towards trying to give readers again, you know, a flavor of the complexity of the human mind in terms of the number of biases that we suffer from and how we should try and avoid them towards trying to gain insights from the people that we are innovating for. So
All right. So tell us a little bit about why you describe design thinking as a fad. What do you mean by that, and why does it become a fad in India? This is very interesting to a lot of people in our community, because there has been a bunch of people who've talked about design thinking is bullshit and all that kind of stuff. So why do you describe it as a fad, and what's the antidote to that?
right. So, well, I don't think design thinking itself is a fad, but the way it is being treated, and not necessarily in India itself, but I think abroad as well. So I've had a few instances where people have done, let's say, a distance learning program on design thinking from a foreign university, but did not find it or did not understand it. So, in a sense, for them, maybe the teaching mechanism failed to uh, help them understand the concept itself. Uh, I think design thinking is going to be increasingly relevant in times to come. As I mentioned in the book, at some point we might be coexisting or even competing for relevance with robots and artificial intelligence. So at such point in time where uh, robots and artificial intelligence can pretty much take up most of the jobs that we have today, I feel design thinking would help us in terms of trying to figure out how to stay relevant at such point in time. So from that point of view, I think design thinking is here to stay. It's just that a lot of times what happens is people, if they don't understand it well enough or don't want to understand it well enough, I'm sure you'll always have a certain section of people across the world who would love to just pick up the next new buzzword that's going around, work with it for some time, and then move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. I see that happening a lot with design thinking, and maybe because I have been practicing it for a while now, maybe I take it a little more personally in terms of not wanting people or companies to be taken for a ride or be fooled by people selling them something in the name of design thinking, but which is not. So the book is an effort towards just helping to increase the understanding about design thinking for uh, anybody, irrespective of whether they've heard of the term before or not, or to somebody who's been practicing it but might find it useful in terms of some of the things I have learned along the way, and towards adding it to their existing skill set and so on.
So tell us a little bit about kind of projects, or want to sort of highlight a kind of project that's been in the book or inspired the book the most.
Okay. There are a couple of them, and again, so there have been a lot of articles and observations from around the world. So I've even included an entire chapter on the cyclist Graham Aubrey, if you've heard of him. Uh, I think he broke the world record twice for the distance cycled within a span of 1 hour. The thing with him, looking at it from, let's say, common people point of view, like uh, how can we improve our own lives using design thinking? So a lot of times, I think we as individuals would maybe hope for, or let's say we have a need for a particular product or service. Uh, so while that may or may not be available in the market right now, we'd probably uh, accommodate or adjust with something that exists right now, in the hope that somebody creates something for us. uh, Aubrey, what he did was he was so particular about the design of the bicycle and about his own cycling style that he designed his own bicycle. So he shredded his washing machine at home because he saw the way it would do a few hundred, a few thousand revolutions a minute. So he used the bearings from that on his own bicycle and so on and so forth. He changed his own cycling style to be more aerodynamic, not just the bicycle itself, but his own body, the way he would hold the handlebars and be in a crouched position. And what's brilliant about that is, I think I'm not sure it was last year or something, that they decided to test whether or not that cycling position was actually would actually make a cyclist go faster or not. So they actually invited him to the Mercedes wind tunnel, and they actually found that that particular riding position was far more energy saving and allowed a rider to go much further and faster. So so it's the little things, so even in our individual lives, if we are interested enough, the kind of innovations that we can bring about to simplify the way we live or the way we work and so on. So I've just tried to capture a bunch of those things. With regard to my assignments, so again, since design thinking is fairly new in India, uh, you won't really find a lot of clients coming to you asking you to help them innovate something or reimagine a particular product or service. So a lot of times, having been a strategy consultant, I have kind of bundled design thinking into a strategy consulting project. So let's say I'm analyzing a market or competitors for a particular client. Also, let's say identifying new products and services for them to offer their customers. So, for example, there was one client in the errand services space, online and offline. Uh, I didn't like the name of that startup. So, just interacting with some of their potential clients, customers, uh, what I did was I kind of personified the kind of traits they would look for in that kind of a service. And this was in 2012. And, the end of that particular exercise, apart from giving them recommendations on new services that they could offer, which would be relevant to this market, I also dared to propose a new name for that startup. The name was Alfred, after Batman's butler, based on the traits that I had kind of gathered from these prospective customers. Of course, the promoters had some other plans and didn't go ahead with that startup, so they eventually wrapped it up at some point. But what I read later was that in 2015, two Harvard grads actually started an errand services company. I think somewhere in Europe, and I think they named it Alfred. I'm assuming with a similar mindset. So that was 3 years later. So that was just a simple example of let's say if you just apply trying to understand customer need and perception, the kind of maybe timing advantage you can get. Uh, just a simple example, but so imagine what will happen if you actually apply it to the products or services themselves.
Absolutely, and so there is a two sort of axes of ways to improve. One is to reduce waste, right, and the other one is to increase and optimize ways in which we can create more and increase capacity and quality and so on. And design thinking loves both of those somewhat equally. It's all on, like wherever we can get value, we'll get it, bearing people in mind, and also bearing that the outcomes and intentions need to be good for society at large, because we also bear, like, the empathy step is there to ensure that the customer lives on and doesn't die as a result of using services, right? Because a dead customer is no good. They don't pay money. Okay, go on.
So I think a couple of months back, there was a discussion on the group you've created on Facebook, which is brilliant, by the way, where somebody happened to mention that. So I think people were discussing the definition of design thinking and UI and UX and all of that, and trying to differentiate between all of that. And somebody happened to mention that it's not just human beings, but it can probably be applied to animals as well. And yeah, that kind of stuck in my head, and I've actually included two stories about animals in the book. One where I felt design thinking was used, and the other one where it was clearly not used, because a couple of animals died actually because of a particular product that was launched.
Yeah, I mean, it's like what we've found to be the case with our program called Fresh Mind, where we guide people through the spiral dynamics, the stages of human consciousness development. Once they get up to the holistic level, where they are equating their own identity with the universe, not even just the planet, They start developing peace, reverence, joy, and synchronicity with every living kind of creature. And I found myself in my own experience that after doing Fresh Mind, I'd started taking a lot more care and attention of like the smallest creatures, like, you know, ants and spiders. You know, it's like there's no need for me to kill a spider in the house because it's serving a certain purpose, you know. And I really go out of my way not to kill even smallest of creatures because there is no need for it, really. And that's really also a practice on empathy, not just with other humans' thoughts and feelings, but with other every living creature, to the point where this kind of like the idea of that everything is potentially conscious also means that, you know, we can be empathetic even with plants and rocks, and looking after the earth in the true sense, earth being the both word for the earth as in soil, but earth as in the planet earth. So there's my little sort of spiritual side note on all of this. So tell me a little bit, actually, you know, originally asked you a question of who are you. How would you answer that question in the sense of in a sort of more spiritual sense, rather than you know, I'm a design thinker, consultant, and cyclist, and so on?
Wow. That's gonna be a tough one. Well, I think I'm still, figuring myself out. But thanks to design thinking, and I've been interested in human behavior and psychology, like, probably since I was in school. Uh, so I have become increasingly attuned to, uh, everything from, let's say, uh, behavior, cause and effect, and all of that. Uh, so I love observing it uh, you know, in the outside, but uh, you also become a little more uh, aware and mindful of it when you are interacting with people as well. Uh, I see businesses as kind of like individuals, in a sense that they're created for a purpose that is much larger than uh, the sum of the people that work for that company. So from that point of view, when I work with companies, I am very particular about everything from, let's say, the vision of the company, whether or how aligned they are with their customers and all of that. uh, so I think it's just, so of course I haven't gotten to that level of depth that you talk of, but I think at a simpler level where just in terms of, let's say, cause and effect and uh, human biases and all of that, I try to kind of grapple with all of that in terms of my little effort towards, let's say, reducing corruption, and hopefully making the world better.
So talk to us then about future. You know, when your book is called Design the Future, you know, like, I'm going to ask you again. I'm going to switch this interview up a little bit and ask you some more metaphysical questions. Right? Let's see. It's almost like a test for you now. So, what is future?
Okay. Wow. um, so I think if you look at it from, let's say, I don't know, advancement of technology point of view, uh, there are some people who have the view that maybe if you were to slow down the speed of, or the pace of the advancement, we might be a little more content, as we would be able to stop and kind of appreciate what we have right now. But again, knowing us as humans, I don't think we are kind of built to slow down. I think we'll just continue at a blistering pace in terms of advancements. It could be in healthcare or home automation, space tech, and all of that, even defense. But at the same time, I think we need to kind of become, or just include these little components into it. Like you said, Mother Earth, animals and plants and all of that. There's a company that I've known and been associated with for several years now. It's called Kimpro Consultants. So they kind of the forerunners when it comes to quality in India, at least. So they, for the last 29 years, have had been recognizing exceptional performance by leaders from different walks of life, largely in the business space. But over time, so again, they are very attuned to the needs and their own core purpose of recognizing these exceptional individuals. So they've gone from recognizing people in business to recognizing people in education, in healthcare, and now they've also gotten into environment. So anyone who's doing exceptional work for the environment, is kind of shortlisted, and then they probably get recognized for their work. So similarly, so we could continue when we speak of the future. We could continue with what we're doing, be it in healthcare or any other space. But I think we just add these little components, where we make sure that we're not, let's say, displacing animals or doing it at the cost of, let's say, people maybe in another country or in another state or so on and so forth. If we can just become a little more mindful of those things, I think we can still achieve our technology goals while, not losing out a lot of earth or risking our own, survival or future as a species going forward.
So I would personally say something that like future is like a field of possibilities, right? So designing the future is like giving ourselves the best options and opportunities and possibilities in the moment that comes ahead of us. So setting ourselves up for a better life than in this moment right now, and having to do less to have more, without that more impacting negatively on the future possibilities, right? The future field of possibilities that comes after that. So it's a very, very tricky process, that, because I was just kind of went off on a little sort of live stream kind of download of consciousness, but I was saying that as designers, we are designing now for people, and this idea of empathy, we're empathizing with people now, but we're designing for them in 6, 12, 24 months. There's a gestation period that it takes for a service to go into operations, usually at least 6 months. Even at small companies. So we're empathizing with people now, but they're going to use whatever we produce in 6 months' time. So tell me a little bit about, how do we design for the future? Like, how do you design for me in 6 months' time when I don't even know who I'm going to be in 6 months' time?
Sure. I kind of touch upon that in the book. So it's part of the steps that I've added to it. So
there is the way. There is a way.
Of course. So the disconnect I found, when interacting with some people and companies when it came to design thinking, was that they would use the step empathy as more of, a switch on, switch off kind of thing, where, for the sake of going through that particular step or process, they would switch on empathy, interact with people, capture some data, switch it off, go on to the next step, and define the problem and start ideating for a solution and so on. The bit I mentioned, so I've changed the format, so it's not a process that goes from left to right anymore. I've put layers underneath which kind of stay the same through the entire process. That has empathy in it. So I think how we could solve this problem is where you start engaging with the particular user that you're innovating for on day one. uh, you shouldn't stop engaging with them, let's say when you think you've captured sufficient data, but rather you engage them through the entire development process. So what happens is, as they see how, let's say, two or more prototypes are evolving, their understanding of the problem itself uh, goes much deeper. Their understanding of themselves and their need goes much deeper. They have inputs for you, uh, even 6 months or 1 year down the line. But what happens with, let's say, how some of these people would be doing it is, let's say, they switch off empathy. Then you stop listening to those people because you've captured all that data. You've gone back to your uh, you know creative space, and you started finding those solutions and working on towards getting them out of the door, right? But rather, if you kept calling in those end users to uh, into the conversation, maybe you'd have something that is relevant to them even 6 months or 2 years down the line.
Totally. And it's like akin to some sort of restaurant situation where the person that's serving you just kind of, sometimes they here in London, they've been instructed by management, right, to, after they serve you the meal, and they go, they let you sort of eat for 5-10 minutes, and then they go back to the table, and is the food okay? Yes, everything's all right. And then you're kind of, it's like a leading question. So you just go, yeah, it's all right. Even if it's not all right, you say it's all right, and it's kind of pseudo empathy. And but nobody ever really collates any of that data. Even, it's kind of like switch on, switch off empathy, and it's really kind of just as in like it's some sort of checklist type thing, but it's not even done properly, even that thing. Whereas empathy, as you were saying, needs to be an ongoing running mode of operation, like a way of being. And I find myself like stroking my beard because I haven't shaven. Like it makes me look like some sort of like a wise guy. Like, yeah, empathy should be the ongoing mode of operation. So I'll switch that over to you in terms of the question of we've found it to be the case. I think that a lot of designers feel quite burnt out by constantly empathizing with people, and because that empathy uh, approach, right, and way of being is quite can be quite tiring, because a lot of the time people feel negative emotion. So if you're in that empathy with negative emotion, you actually inherit that, and you get lost in what's my emotion and what's their emotion, right? What am I thinking? So to tell us a little bit about that, have you found that to be the case? How do you deal with that yourself?
The case. So I mentioned a line in the book, ironically, that when you are empathizing, you need to be subjective about the empathy aspect of it, but objective about the data that you're capturing, so that you don't, end up becoming, let's say, an emotional wreck, or becoming mentally disturbed with the kind of feedback or experiences that you're soaking in.
And that's a super advanced cognitive capability, right? That's not simple at all.
No, it isn't. No.
So
So I
can you
think
just, since it's complicated, can you just explain it to me in 3 seconds how I can do it?
let's look at doctors, right? They're interacting with patients day in and day out, and without becoming, an emotional wreck at the end of the day when they're looking at, multiple diseases and all of that, is because their objective is towards curing the person, right? So while you allow them to express themselves, you're capturing the data, but the data is going towards your effort toward a solution. as opposed to just hearing it for the story's sake or whatever, right? So I think when our objective as design thinkers or innovators is clear towards wanting to make a difference for those people, we will capture that data and be able to just filter out the emotional aspect of it while using that data towards helping those make those lives better. That's it.
Yeah, and I think perhaps that's the reason why a lot of people are perhaps scared and not so interested in empathizing with others, because the truth of the matter is that often the time when you start empathizing with others, you start getting to understand how many sort of negative and bad and destructive thoughts people and emotions people have for all sorts of reasons. You end up really dipping into the shadow side of other humans. So to start slowly sort of wrapping this up, answer any question that you would like to be asked about the book, please.
I think I'll just add to what you've been saying, where so what I love about design thinking is something very very fundamental and human about the practice. So again, a lot of people cannot just bluff their way with design thinking because, again, it's related to human behavior. So there's only so far you'll get by bluffing your way through it, as opposed to, let's say, trying the same thing with maybe some other management practices or tools and so on and so forth. And again, since you mentioned that a lot of times we as design thinkers need to interact with the the rougher side of things when you're trying to capture customer or user experiences. So I think yeah, I'm of course I'm trying to simplify this a lot, but I think a majority of people are generally good. So a lot of times it's not like everyone's just waiting to unload their baggage on you as a design thinker. But it's something like, let's say an angry customer, right? uh, so we, let's say, as customer service people, a lot of people would try to avoid that angry customer because you don't want to get that unloading of emotions and anger and all of that. But if you've noticed, those few people who would actually walk up to that angry customer, all they want is to be heard, right? So you spend a couple of minutes listening to them, and things aren't as messy anymore because then they're actually sharing valuable information that could help you as a business kind of improve. So, but yeah, we need to be prepared to just go through that little bit of discomfort towards gaining much more.
Sure. And so how long did it take you to write this book, and what was the process like for you? How did that feel?
Like I mentioned, I've used a lot of stories from interesting articles from around the world that I've read over time. So the articles, I think, are spread over several years. I must have written for about 9 or 10 months, I think. Uh, yes. So just combining all of my stories, my little jotting of notes, and all of that, plus extracting relevant information from these different articles.
And so how many more books are you planning to write, going forward?
Well, as of now, yeah, no such plans. I don't know. Let's see. Hopefully
Awesome.
someday
And what? Yeah.
someday I'd have a book about the projects that I've worked on in design thinking, like a big enough book that I'd love to share. Yes.
And so one final question for you. Since the book is about design, the future, where do you see yourself in 50 years' time?
I'll get there. I don't know.
What about in 10 years' time?
Uh, well, this sounds a little big, but uh, I see myself using design thinking to hopefully transform India and hopefully the world by way of maybe products, services, and behavioral changes, if that's possible. Uh, yeah, but it's a little broad, but yeah, I'll figure out how to get there.
Well, our mission is redesigning humanity, so we're already on that. So you're welcome to join by all means, and we'd love to help you out. So that's a perfect kind of ending to that. So let's continue working together to redesign humanity, my friend. Thanks very much for giving me this conversation and answering questions. We'll spread the word about your book far and wide, and yeah, best of luck. Keep in touch. Cheers.
Wish you
All the
the
best.
best as well.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.